blonde hair, and I'm sitting in front of a plain gray background. I work with the Described and Captioned Media Program. I am the Marketing and Communications Specialist.
Great, welcome, thank you. And then Austin Stam.
Hi, my name is Austin Stam. I am a white male, early 30s. I have short brown hair, and I'm wearing a plaid button-down shirt with some blue and brown. And the background is my office, my real office, and I have a giant pencil in the background. And I am from Stanford University. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Digital Accessibility Instructional Specialist.
Well, thank you, everybody, and welcome. So we're going to start with each person giving a presentation on their relevant topic. And then if there's any questions that come up during, we'll be able to ask them throughout the program. So for those watching live, please feel free to ask questions in the chat. And Nick, can we start with you?
Sure. I'm going to share my screen right now.
That's great. We can see your slides.
Awesome. So my presentation is called Lost in the Crowd, Technologies to Support Conference Goers with Disabilities. And yeah, just a repeat of my name. I'm a doctoral candidate, the program manager, and an indentured servant to my 14-month-old baby Zoe, which at this point, everyone is her servant. Is what I'm convinced. So, seconds. There we go. So, so this presentation is going to focus by and large on some different technology solutions that can support a couple different types of individuals with disabilities in attending large conferences. We're going to start with large or small conferences. I'm going to start out by discussing technologies that can support individuals who are blind or visually impaired. And so to begin with, where am I? So one of the major difficulties, especially for conference goers who are blind or visually impaired, is location within conference centers, finding how to find what they want to find when you want to find it. So obviously you can always ask to security guards or to other conference goers for support, but we're also always interested in ways that we can promote more independence. So what are some of the technologies that can support independence? So first off, let's talk about something called visual interpretation. So visual interpretation is an accommodation for people who are blind or visually impaired that help them, it connects the individual to a sighted guide that is either a volunteer or a professional that can help them read documents, navigate websites, or traverse unfamiliar websites. Excuse me, traverse new or unfamiliar environments. There's a couple of popular visual interpretation services. One is, so there are two particularly popular ones, Be My Eyes and Access to Information Remote Assistance, or Aira. The way that these services work is they use a camera on the iPhone, or a camera on your smartphone, excuse me, and you're connected with volunteers, either locally or around the world even, that can help you can help you by visually describing what they see around you or helping you navigate through environments. The major difference between these two services is that Be My Eyes relies more heavily on volunteers, whereas Aira is a paid service that relies on professionals who have been trained. So when we talk about navigating physical spaces, although you can certainly use either service, Aira, the staff at Aira, they're referred to as agents, have been professionally trained in how to assist individuals with disabilities with navigation. So they may be a more reliable go-to. And at least in the case of Aira, conferences can hire these services, so they can hire the services of Aira and provide individuals who need this accommodation a code or a number that they can use so that the conference can pay for that service. And let's talk about the power of AI. So there are several smartphone apps that use the power of AI to recognize faces, identify nearby surroundings, and read printed text on signs. A few of these include Scene AI and Envision AI. Some of these will even allow you to take pictures and store faces of friends and family members so that the artificial intelligence will know to recognize them in the future. These are particularly useful for individuals who are trying to read poster presentations. So that can be really useful if you're in a poster hall and you want to look at some presentations. These smartphone apps can be a great resource for scanning text and reading it. And finally, let's talk about Envision glasses. So Envision AI, the smartphone app that we just discussed, has done a partnership in the past with Google Glass so that you create a wearable assistant that can use smartphone Bluetooth connected to the glasses so that you don't have to walk around with your smartphone held in your hand up at eye level. Now, in 2022, Envision also partnered with Aira, another service that we've already discussed, to create a human assistant service as well, so that when the AI is not enough, you can also be connected to a human assistant. Now, the one thing I want to highlight, though, is that earlier this year, Google Glass was discontinued, and it's still not clear how this discontinuation will affect the partnership with Envision AI. In terms of indoor navigation, GPS is not always reliable because it doesn't have as good of a sense of where you're located. So another tool to assist people who are blind or visually impaired with indoor navigation is called Indoor Navigation Maps. They use indoor positioning systems, IPS, to highlight points of interest, guide visitors on the most direct path to where they want to locate, where they want to get to. These technologies rely on Bluetooth beacons that are set up around an environment that will ping your phone. And as you turn your phone, you can get info on what is ahead of you and where you need to go. Right here is a popular indoor navigation system. It can provide talking signage that can guide you to important points like bathrooms, etc. And it can also provide responsive information, if, for example, tell you that a staircase is coming up ahead of you or the exit to a building is located behind you. Let's talk about supporting individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing. Captions and subtitles, I don't think are a surprise to anyone, but quickly the definition. Captions are typically inclusive of the music or sounds that are in an environment. So not only does it provide the text of dialogue, but it will also provide the text of music or other sounds that a deaf or hard of hearing person might not pick up on. Subtitles, on the other hand, focus more on just the dialogue or spoken words in a video, and therefore doesn't necessarily include music or sound effects. Some popular captioning softwares include many of our favorite conferencing systems, such as Zoom or Teams, Microsoft Teams. These can offer live automatic captioning. They vary in accuracy, but they can also provide a really quick and easy solution to captioning. Even for an in-person captioning, a virtual Zoom room can be set up so that the presenter has a microphone, and any attendees who would like to access these subtitles can connect via their computer while still sitting in the same room. It's a simple solution, but it's a low-cost one. Then there's paid captioning, such as Ava, which is a captioning service that partners AI, the power of AI, with human reviewers that can review the text and make corrections, getting it to a near 99% accuracy. The great thing about these services is that they can be downloaded to your smartphone or to a computer to offer on-the-go captioning for conference calls, in-person meetings, even classroom lectures. And then there's the CART service, which is communication access real-time translation. It provides instant translation of the spoken text, of spoken dialogue, relying on a stenograph machine, a notebook computer, and real-time software. So typically CART providers have a certification, and captions can be provided on individuals' computers, projected onto a screen, or combined with a video presentation. It also helps to provide materials ahead of time to the CART providers, especially so that they can get the correct spelling of names or acronyms that are going to be used. A couple considerations for supporting captioning, especially in terms of technology, is can a large screen be used so that multiple people in an audience can benefit from the captions, not only people who are deaf or hard of hearing, but maybe people who speak a second language? Are screens placed in a location where they can maximize visibility? And is seating reserved for individuals who absolutely need to be using, to be viewing the screen? So make sure that there's some seating available close to the screen, in the front of the row, wherever the most advantageous position would be. And finally, supporting people who speak second language. Subtitles in videos. So subtitles are obviously an important part of any visual presentation, and they assist both people who are deaf or hard of hearing, as well as second language speakers. But how can you add subtitles to videos? There's a number of possible strategies. Zoom, as we discussed earlier, can provide subtitles. And if you want to record a simple presentation, you can do so on Zoom and then later go into your Zoom. You can start Zoom, ensure that the video is being recorded to the cloud, enable captioning, do your presentation. And 5, once your video has been processed, you can go into the file and update the subtitle file with any corrections, name changes, etc. Then you can download these videos and include them in your PowerPoint presentation or wherever you need them to be. And finally, there's also YouTube, which is a great captioning service because you can film your own videos, upload them to YouTube, and rely on the fact that YouTube has automatic captioning that can then be corrected and later downloaded so that you can use that caption file and provide that caption file either as a transcript or in other presentations. That is all. I apologize. I kind of rushed a bit to respect time, but thank you very much for your attention and look forward to hearing our fellow panelists.
Thank you, Nick. That was not rushed. It was very interesting. And while you were presenting all of the different tools that are available, especially with large conferences for those that have visual impairments, I was thinking universally designed. If we were able to provide a lot of these services, many other people would benefit from them also. I was thinking of the indoor navigation. There's been many conferences that I've attended where I would have really appreciated an indoor navigation map of some sort. So, you know, when people are thinking about creating these large conferences or even smaller ones, being able to have these accessible tools for one population of people really is going to benefit many populations that they haven't even thought of. So it's definitely worth looking into. Thank you so much. Okay, we're going to switch to Christina LaRue now.
Awesome. Hello again, everyone. So thank you, Nick, for all of your information. Nick's presentation was super interesting because it was kind of a mix of proactive and reactive accessibility, some stuff that we can do proactively and some stuff that our attendees might be doing. I'm going to take us back to the proactive side, kind of starting from the beginning of creating an event or a conference. So when we think about that, the first thing I always tell folks is start from the very beginning. Think about accessibility as soon as you're starting to plan an event or a conference. It's so much easier to do these things ahead of time and kind of plan for some things and do some universal design like Christine was mentioning than to reactively do this. So start from the very beginning. When you're thinking about where are you going to host this, let's think about accessible locations. Is there an accessible pathway to get into the building? Are there restrooms that are relatively close by that are accessible, that are maybe gender inclusive? All of those types of things to think about. And then, of course, I've had the same experience that Christine mentioned of being somewhere where I'm very unfamiliar with the space and needing some direction, right? So that would be helpful too. So starting to think through all of that when you're selecting location, when you're selecting maybe even the platform where you're hosting a conference. So maybe we're hosting a Zoom conference. Is Zoom more accessible than Teams? Those are the types of things to be thinking about. The other really big piece is we can't always anticipate everyone's needs. I would love if we could, but everybody has some different needs and might encounter different barriers. And so you should always, always, always have an accommodation request process. And you should communicate that really well to your attendees. And so, putting out a statement that says, if you have any accommodation needs, reach out to us within X number of days, and we'll try to accommodate that. That's also a really good time to maybe include that in your registration. So if you had to go through a registration link, is there a question in there that says, hey, do you need accommodations? And you can even prompt some folks with some common accommodations, like maybe they need accessible materials. So instead of having a printed material, they need a virtual material, things like that. And also communicating on advertisements. If you're sending emails or if you're posting posters somewhere, again, telling folks, hey, you're welcome to request accommodations, and here's how you do that. I think the one piece that folks often forget is, okay, we've got this request process. Sometimes our presenters also need accommodations. And so really anybody that's participating, whether they're presenting, whether they're helping moderate or attending that session, that conference, that event, that accommodation process can be super important. Another big piece to think about is a lot of our events, especially conferences, have food attached to it. Most of us are trying to get some kind of hook to have people attend, and that's often food, which is great, but we're starting to see even more dietary restrictions and allergies than ever before. And think instead of the top 8 food allergies, we're now up to 9. And so those are very, very prevalent. So when we're thinking through our food planning, are we creating inclusive options? Do we have a gluten-free option? Are our options nut-free, things like that? And also, it's great to have those, but also let's label the food. So when I actually go to a conference or an event, I can look at the options and see what works best for me, not only for potential allergies or disabilities, but for your own preferences. I don't enjoy Brussels sprouts, so I'm not going to eat something that has that in there. And then also your signage. So having accessible signage, and that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but that might mean having large signage, large letters, inclusive fonts, good color contrast, or maybe having some of that written down. So maybe you have a list of the restrooms, but you also include the accessible restrooms. We know not every restroom is accessible, so making sure we have those options communicated effectively to our participants is really important. With that comes some common accessibility barriers that we might be able to anticipate. And I've already actually mentioned a lot of them as I was talking. The first one I always think of is dietary allergies and/or restrictions. If we're having food, we should plan for inclusive options. That might mean gluten-free or dairy-free or nut-free. Those are some really common ones. Or even vegetarian or vegan, which are some more restrictions or lifestyle potential changes. So thinking through all of that, and if you can't have a whole option for that, having something you can sub out. So if someone tells you, hey, I'm vegan, you've got a vegan meal option, maybe not out there for everybody, but it is an option for that person. Another really big one that's hard to address is fragrance sensitivities. All of us have varying levels of being able to handle different fragrances. And so what I can tell you is when we're planning conferences in different spaces, let's not proactively add fragrances. I know in my own house, I have those little Glade plugins in my wall because they smell nice, but I would never want to do that in an event or a conference because I'm not sure what the tolerance looks like for fragrances. And so, lessening those environmental pieces. And you may also want to communicate to your participants not to wear a ton of fragrances to kind of cut down on some of that. We can't control attendees, we can't control who's coming, but we can also put out that message saying, hey, this is really important to us. Can you please consider what kind of fragrances you're wearing and how strong those might be? Access to a restroom is also always super important. Obviously, an accessible restroom, a gender inclusive restroom, but also there are folks who just need more frequent access to restrooms. And so making sure those are communicated location wise, and you're also allowing folks to step out if they need to use the facilities. There are folks who need breaks. I know even without a disability, if you're in a conference for 3, 4, 5 hours, your brain's going to get exhausted at some point. So building in intentional breaks. Of course, we might be moving from session to session and have a few minutes, but also you might build in like a 15-minute snack break or just a break to network or something so folks can get out of their typical spaces. Alt format for materials is a pretty common request and or barrier. So folks may not be able to access printed materials. They might need access to a digital version or an accessible digital version, things like that. And then another big piece is communication access. And what I mean by that is making sure everyone can access your communication. So if I'm sitting in a conference room, making sure whoever's speaking is using that microphone. If folks are asking questions, we're walking a microphone around to have the participants vocalize in an amplified manner their questions. Or as a presenter, I'm repeating those questions before I answer them. So folks have access to that communication. Captioning might be a part of that. We just heard Nick talk about that, and interpreting might be there as well. And then finally, accessible parking. Parking is always a huge issue. I know I work on a massive campus and parking is a daily struggle. Depending on where you're hosting that event, there might be long walks to get to the area where you're hosting it. There may not be close accessible parking. And so communicating that to folks ahead of time and also trying to select locations that have accessible parking. Okay, my other topic for you is posters, and we're going to run through this fairly quickly because I know some other folks are addressing accessible materials. So when I think about posters, when I go to a conference, oftentimes it's someone with a really large piece of paper or poster board that's presenting research to me or presenting some kind of information. There's 2 different versions to that. We've got the in-person posters. So I'm at a conference, I'm looking at the poster, trying to decipher it. There are also digital posters. And so there's 2 sides to this, the in-person component and the virtual component. So when we're talking about those printed in-person experiences, building an accessible poster, there's a couple things to think about. Having very, very clear layouts. So making sure, your background section is different from your results section, and those are clearly delineated on your poster. Using as large a fonts as possible. There's nothing worse than coming up to a poster and seeing 10-point font. That's super difficult to read. And so having as big a font as possible. Using good color contrast. So it's easy for folks to tell between the different colors. And what I mean by that is your foreground color is distinct from your background color. So for right now, you're seeing a black text on a white background. That's great color contrast. And then because we're talking about posters, oftentimes it's research. So making sure we don't use color alone to convey meaning. So if I've got a line graph, I don't want to have 4 different colors, each representing a line, because if I can't see color, I have no idea what those variables are. Make sure you spell out acronyms at least 1 time so folks have a grasp of what those are. And then if you've got images, especially for in-person experiences, consider adding a caption. And so that's just kind of a short description of the image right below it, because although we're experts in our field, in our research, things like that, whoever's looking at it is not the expert. And so having that description is super helpful. If you are including a QR code to a digital version, and make sure the digital version is digitally accessible, and ensure any handouts are accessible as well. And then finally, I said there's a virtual component. This is my jam. I love digital accessibility, so we could talk all day about this. But briefly, if you're doing a virtual poster, usually it's some kind of document, probably a PDF. Make sure it's digitally accessible. And there's tons of components there. But I would say rely on an accessible template. Most of the time, I see this done inside of PowerPoint, some kind of slide, making sure that template, your source doc, is accessible, which might mean heading structures, color contrast, adding alt text to your images. If you've got videos, captioning those are all really good digital accessibility practices. I would say oftentimes posters are not saved in that format. They're saved as a PDF, which is totally cool, but you have to make sure that PDF is accessible, which is a very different process. So you're tagging that PDF, you're making sure reading order is appropriate, things like that. And like I said, I could spend 2 or 3 hours with you just talking through that, but that's kind of the basic components of how you would make that poster accessible. So that's what I've got for you on my side, but I'm excited to hear everybody else's things as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christina. Yeah, that's very informative. I was thinking too, when you were talking about setting up and pre-planning, even if you know your audience, sometimes disabilities can be temporary and people might have them, in a short period of time. So even if it's somebody you don't know what they're experiencing at that point. So it is really important to be able to pre-plan. And then those alt texts too, I know especially with research posters, not to just say in an alt text, here's a graph. You need to give the information on that graph too, so that people understand it. So that's really important. All right, so now let's move over to Cindy Camp.
Hello. Thank you, Christina. That was a great setup because I'm going to be talking about presentation materials and handouts. And I'm going to be going over some of the same things that you were talking about, but I'll expand on that a little bit. So first of all, let me say again, I'm with the Described and Captioned Media Program, and we're a federally funded grant. And so if you have questions about making videos accessible through adding captions or audio description, we have lots of resources on our website for that. And on my opening screen, I have a screenshot of our opening webpage. So that's just another resource that you can access. And I'm going to reiterate that when you're making your handouts and your presentation materials, you really want to be proactive, not reactive. And that's a very different mindset from what we're used to, because we're used to developing a presentation with what we would normally do. And then we hear, oh, I'm going to have a student with a disability in my class. And so now I have to go back and change things. And that means that you're adding a lot of extra time. If you can change your mindset and build that accessibility in from the beginning, it takes a little bit more time on the front end, but overall, you're going to save yourself a lot of time, and you're going to have a much more accessible presentation and handout for everybody. Because another takeaway I want you to have is good teaching, good presentations are good teaching. It doesn't matter what age group, what what setting, it's just good teaching overall, whether it's virtual, whether it's a conference, whether it's a classroom. If you set up your presentation, your class in the right way, it's going to be good for everybody. And you won't have to make as many adjustments overall. So going in with that mindset is going to make your teaching, your presentation better for everyone. And so I wanted to give you some resources for Universal Design for Learning. And in the handouts, you'll get these websites. But think of it as a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all peoples based on scientific insights into how humans learn. And the idea started out in architecture, and we've seen that. You build in ramps, and it started out as that was accessibility for people in wheelchairs. But how many of us love using ramps? If you're traveling and you're pulling a suitcase behind you, if you're a young parent and you have a stroller, if you're carrying AV equipment across campus, we all love ramps. Don't we all love the automatic doors that you can push to open? So when you have your hands full, you don't have to try and open those doors. So the things that make it easier and were designed for individuals with disabilities also make it easier for all of us in general. And that can apply to how we set up classes, how we set up presentations as well. So these are some great resources for you to look into. And now I want to get into, these are just a very few in helping you develop more accessible presentations. And I'll reiterate some of what Christina already said. Keep your design simple. Use a simple, non-cluttered design template. And each of my slides gives you an example of what not to do. This design is very cluttered. It says notebook lesson, there's squiggles everywhere, there's a sticker on here, there's sticky notes, and you can't even see what to focus on. When there's so much going on, it's really hard to focus in. So keep it simple. And that doesn't mean it has to be boring. Put in some color, put in some fun designs, but don't let those take away from the message. Also, notice that in the top right, the title of my slide is Making PowerPoint Accessible 1. Keep that in mind as we go through. This slide is Making PowerPoint Accessible 2. And I'll explain why I'm labeling them this way as we get a little further along. This slide talks about how to make the PowerPoints accessible by limiting the text on each slide. You'll see at the bottom, there is a huge amount of text in paragraph format. It's low, very small font, lots and lots of text, and really hard to read. There's no separation. It's just all thrown in there. And a general rule is to limit a text, the amount of information on a slide, to about 5 to 7 bullet points and about 10 words per bullet point. And then to ensure that the size of the font is large enough. And that means the header, the title of it, should be 36 to 44 point, and each bullet point 24 to 28. Those are just some general rules. It will vary depending on the font style that you choose. But when you cram in too much information, it means nobody can see it really well. Next, you want to choose a font that is a sans serif and it's easy to read. And on this, I have several bullet points with a lot of really pretty font styles, but they're all kind of hard to read. And people may choose different fonts because they like them, but especially if you're giving a presentation to a large audience, they may not always be easy to read. If someone is low vision, if someone is older and just can't see as clearly as they used to, choosing the simple fonts that are clear is going to make it easier for everyone to see. Then making sure that you have enough color contrast. On this one, I have a picture with the background that's a light blue. the text is an even lighter blue, and then the picture is in a blue hue. And that's purposeful because if you can see really well, you can make it out. But if this were in a large room and you were seeing in the back of the room, you wouldn't be able to read that text. And it would be very hard to make out. So you want to make sure there's enough color contrast. And so I actually gave you a website here where you can go and check it out, because sometimes visually what you may think is enough contrast might not be. So if there's ever a question, you can check out the website and actually put in the different colors and it will tell you. Next, if you're including any kind of video, you want to make sure that that video is fully accessible. At the bare minimum, you want to add captions, but this one is fully accessible because it has captions, it has audio description, and it has an ASL interpretation. And this is an example of what you would find on the DCMP website. It's a really short clip that I'm going to play for you. And let me know if the sound does not come through, and I'll fix that.
I'm not hearing the sound.
Okay. Let me stop sharing and reshare because I forgot to say share sound. Let's try that again.
There we go.
A dusty pink machine with 12 rectangular windows stands upright on a pallet. In black and white footage, a man lifts a window. He removes a plate of food and smiles.
Of course, when you say automat or Hornet hardware, very few people know what you're talking about. But one of the greatest inventions and insane centers of paradise were these places that had little glass windows framed in brass with knobs. And if you put 2 nickels into the slot next to the windows would open up.
So you get the idea that when you include video, you want to make it fully accessible. And you can go to the DCMP website and get guidelines for adding captions and audio descriptions, and coming soon, adding ASL. Making your handouts accessible. I talked with you, we talked about adding the alt text. Here are some directions on how to do that. Right-clicking on the image and adding that alt text in and making sure that it's descriptive. Also, when you're doing handouts from a PowerPoint, be sure and use the layout feature. Don't just put in text boxes, because using the layout is going to set it up to be accessible. Then you can actually turn it into an outline if you've used that layout feature. And also, that was why I was mentioning, make sure every slide has a different title. If you're talking about the same topic over several slides, that's why each of mine says making handouts accessible 1, 2, 3, so that in the handouts, then each part has a different title and it shows up in that outline, and it's going to be accessible as a handout then. When you're doing handouts in Word, make sure that you're using the structural markup in Word. This means up in the top where it says headers, 1, 2, 3. I know that I did not used to use those because I would visually format my text. However, for an individual who is blind or low vision and using a screen reader, that turns to gibberish. They don't see all that pretty color that I'm putting in, or the bold, or the change in fonts. And here's an example. On the far left is what a sighted person would see, with color and bold and added space in between. In the middle, it just all runs together. And that's what a screen reader reads to a person who is blind. On the far right, if you use the structural markup, I went ahead and added color and bold in there because for us sighted people, it makes it pop. But that is going to be what a screen reader will read to a blind individual, heading level 1. And then it will read that text. And so that reading the heading level 1, level 3, level 2 gives them that pop that the visual gives a sighted individual. When you're making handouts, make sure that you have them in a variety of formats, electronic, print, text only, so that they're available in whatever format an individual may need. Make sure that you put in the full URLs, because if you're giving them out electronically, the URL comes across. But if you turn that into a print only, then suddenly you just have the word that's highlighted and underlined, and there's no URL that you can click on. Avoid using inaccessible resources. Don't link to websites that aren't accessible, because now you've just told your students with disabilities that only those students who can access those websites get those additional resources. And don't just scan a document as an image. You have to use optical character recognition to make sure that when you scan a document in, it is then accessible to screen readers. Here are some helpful websites. You'll get those in the handouts. And then if you have any questions, please follow up with me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Cindy. That was really helpful. I know I use PowerPoint headings a lot, and what I found is that it actually helps me to help organize my information, and it's almost automatic for me to do that now. Also, the WebAIM checker, I use that very often. All right, so now let's go to Austin Stam.
Hi, I'm Austin, and I'm going to be presenting on inclusive presentation techniques. I'm going to be echoing some of the themes that you've heard previously. A little bit about me: I have mild cerebral palsy, ADHD, and prosopagnosia. I benefited from universal design and assignments that foster multiple means of engagement. For example, in school, I had a really hard time making poster board projects, and I learned how to use Final Cut Pro and make movies instead of poster board. And so that I ended up actually getting my bachelor's in film production. So that's an example of kind of how, luckily, my school was kind of able to incorporate universal design into their curriculum. I'm working on a doctorate now in educational technology from Boise State. And the agenda today is I'm going to go over how to prepare an inclusive presentation and some inclusive presentation strategies. So how to prepare. Presentation preparation. Provide an accommodations request form with the registration. Provide access to the materials in advance and ensure that they are accessible. Find a quiet, well-lit place and use a dedicated microphone. And when possible, record the presentation. You also want to silence notifications and smartphones. So what's important to really consider for virtual presentations is it's not just telling the audience to silence their notifications, but you actually silencing as well. So you don't want Slack messages or other things coming in that may distract. Another thing to keep in mind is additional presentation tips. You want to turn on algorithmic captions or ensure the captioner or ASL interpreter is ready. Provide technical terms to the captioner or interpreter beforehand. Ensure you have support. So you want like a moderator to field questions or work the chat, a person to provide technical support as well, and test the equipment and do a practice session if possible. And again, a lot of times with the algorithmic captions, they can have a hard time if you're using those technical terms and stuff. So you could really benefit, depending on what the topic is, to having someone who can provide professional captions. And having a moderator and someone to provide technical support helps, and you get to focus on your presentation. You're not having to look at the chat all the time or be concerned with helping someone access the platform. You're able to focus on your session. Consider readability. Use a color contrast checker to ensure that your slide text has a high enough contrast ratio to be readable. 4.5 to 1 is recommended for regular text and 3 to 1 for large text. When presenting in person, be kind to the people sitting in the back. Use a minimum of 28-point font. 36 is recommended. Use high quality images and make them large. Avoid using only color or stylizing to convey information. So a lot of times when you're creating your presentation, you may not be thinking about the people who may be in the very back of the room accessing your presentation. And that's why we saw in some of the slides there, the font being really small and things like that, that you want to be aware of that and ensure that you're creating something that's readable. You don't want to make these mistakes. So avoid difficult text to read, like the example below. So in this example, I have a yellow background over white text, and it says this text is difficult to read. So the color contrast ratio between the white and the yellow is not high enough, so it makes it hard to read, especially from far away. You also want to avoid color alone for slides like this example. So in this example below, I say items in yellow will appear on the quiz, and mitochondria is in yellow, produces the energy for the cell. Ribosomes, which are in white, says packages the protein for the cell. So the idea is that you're just conveying this using color when you want to actually put in writing, this is going to be on the quiz, or have some other method of conveying and not just color alone. Now I have another example here with a pie chart. And on the left, I have this sales pie chart, and it has a legend. But this chart would be inaccessible for people who are colorblind because there's no labels for the different pieces. So it wouldn't it would not be an accessible version. But on the right, I've taken the same pie chart and I've attached labels to each section and extrapolated the slices a little bit. And now it's very clear the label and the amount that go to each slice. So for inclusive slides, it's recommended to avoid animations because they can induce motion sickness in some audience members. Do not include content that flashes more than 3 times in a 1-second period. People with photosensitivity can experience seizures due to flashing content. You want to avoid repeating GIFs or other background animations. These can be distracting for some people. So as someone with ADHD, if you have a lot of GIFs, I might be laughing at some of them, but I would not be able to focus on your main content. They would distract me from what you're trying to present. So really thinking and being intentional about how you're laying out your content so that it's drawing the focus and not background extraneous items. Before the presentation, highlight accessibility features like captions and explain how individuals can access any material. Explain the structure of the presentation, how audience members can ask questions. Before a virtual presentation, remind the audience to mute themselves if they are not speaking. Include an agenda slide at the start of your presentation. So something to keep in mind here is, at the start, you definitely want to highlight the accessibility features, especially if you're providing interpreting and things like that, and making sure that whatever accessibility features are there are mentioned to the audience, as well as ensuring that if you're letting the audience speak, watching the mute and making sure people are unmuted and muted, because in a virtual presentation, that can lead to content being missed. Inclusive presentation strategies. So you want to introduce yourself. We all kind of did this at the start of this webinar. You want to include your name, title, institution, your pronouns that's comfortable, your visual description, race or skin tone, gender, woman, man, person, hair color and length, clothing or background details. So taking the time to do that can be helpful. And I have actually in the resources section some examples of good descriptive, good descriptions. For icebreakers ensure any activities are accessible. Participation should be optional, and a virtual presentation do not require audience members to turn on their camera. Provide an alternative for any physical activity. For example, if you're doing warm-up stretches, incorporate alternative chair yoga poses. Ensure any external platform for polling or questions is accessible and provide extra time to access it. So, the chair yoga, or if you're looking at physical activity, really be aware of how you're going to adapt that and be thinking about that and be intentional. I would say, as well as testing out any external platform if you're using polling or something else, and making sure that that you screened it beforehand to ensure it's accessible. Speaking tips: when people who are deaf or have hearing loss, they can use lip reading strategies. So you want to face the audience during your presentation. Increase your speaking volume and decrease your speaking pace. This helps ensure that you are heard and your words are comprehensible. Remember to pause. This allows the audience to process the information and ask questions. So a lot of times when we're presenting, we can get excited and kind of start to rush through the presentation, but you want to take time to pause and make sure that you're speaking clearly. Conveying slide information. It is best practice to read and describe the content on each slide. This supports people who are blind or have low vision. It also aligns with the representation principle of universal design for learning. Offer an alternative for visual or audio content. Describe charts and images. Describe the meaningful images or charts, the key takeaway of that image or chart, and provide links to the source for any charts or graphs. So in this example here, I have, it's called Conveying Example. I have Halloween candy because it's close to Halloween. And it says United States Halloween candy sales from 2011 to 2023 in billions. And so what you'll notice is I have 3.5, it goes up to 4 billion. And in 2013, it kind of spikes up to 3.5. So I don't know what was going on there, but a lot of people were buying candy. And then it drops back down and it hovers around, 2 billion, 2.5 billion or so. There's a drop under 2 billion, under 2.5 during the pandemic. And then it kind of shoots back up now. And now in 2023, we're looking at having the highest candy sales, I guess. And you can check out I have a link to the website at the bottom for more information. Content warning. So that was an example of how you want to describe your chart or graph. So content warning. Provide a content warning before discussing sensitive subjects or sharing graphic images or video. It is recommended to include a content warning in the marketing materials for the presentation. This can help individuals prepare for the presentation. Specific accommodations might be possible, and provide an opportunity for those who don't feel comfortable to leave and then re-engage. So for example, I have actually some actual examples of content warnings from the University of Michigan. It should be in the resources. And then a personal example is that at USC, I was getting my master's in occupational therapy, and there was a video discussing like sexual assault. And the professor gave warning about that. And then I'll let students know how long the video was going to be played so they could rejoin afterward. And so really, trying to be inclusive for those who don't feel comfortable so they can then later re-engage is really important to think about. Breakout discussions. Provide a space for attendees who do not want to participate. Include the questions in your materials so they can be read in advance and referenced. Provide estimated time per question. Provide a structure so participants know how to respond and their role. For example, go around in alphabetical order. Example, the note taker will share key points. So again, when it comes to providing the time per question, I think that can be really helpful, because sometimes when you try and introduce a breakout discussion at the end of a presentation, people will only use the first or second question. They won't get through everything, but if you provide estimated time per question, that can help, along with really setting up the role and the structure, so that way people can just jump into the discussion versus having a lot of waiting around and trying to figure those things out. And another role to consider would be someone keeping track of the time as well. Would be a good role to have. Question and answer. Provide multiple means for asking questions. Raise your hand and speaking directly. Share the question with the moderator. Pose the question in the chat. Encourage attendees to use a microphone and share their name when asking a question. Repeat the speaker's name and question. Remind virtual attendees to mute their microphone after speaking. So one common thing that I've seen sometimes in conferences is people will try to not use the microphone and ask their question. So just reminding people, to wait, and the microphone will come, because that makes it more inclusive for people and accessible. And yeah, those are my slides. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This was great information from everyone. I know I'm contributing to those Halloween candy sales too, so that number should be going up soon. And then, one thing that I haven't thought about was telling audiences what accessibility tools are available, because of course we're not perfect. We may not have everything, but if we know exactly what is available, it'll help those people to use them, and then use that universal design for learning too. And, another thing we want to think about is, what is the purpose of sharing our information and making it accessible? Because then we get to share our information to the larger audiences. And so the why is just as important as it helps us as much as it does help those people that are requiring those accessibility features. So thank you so much to all of my panelists today. This is a great topic. We learned a lot of information. I learned things that I didn't know before, and I'll be reassessing the way that I'm giving my presentations in the future. So thank you very much, everyone, and we'll see you soon.